Oops, husband accuses her of baby trapping him with a planned pregnancy and ends up losing everything. My husband, male 35, and I, female 32, have been married for 7 years. He lived next door and we just clicked. It was like a fairy tale. One thing I have always thought made our marriage so strong was our friendship with each other and our trust in one another, although now my husband seems to think otherwise. Recently my husband found out that his friend, Geoff, male 34, has been baby trapped. Basically, Geoff's wife, female 32, stopped taking the pill and fell pregnant a few months into their relationship, and only came clean after the wedding. Geoff came from a very conservative family, which his wife knew, and so he felt obligated to marry her after the pregnancy. Unfortunately, he also now feels obligated to stay regardless of the clearly messed up dynamic, because he feels that he has made a vow and will stick by his wife and child. My husband, for some reason, has been really rattled by this. I am currently 4 months pregnant with our first, and my husband asked me yesterday if I was trying to baby trap him. I first laughed because I honestly thought it was a joke. He was dead serious and doubled down, so I told him that we have already been married for 7 years, and a baby was not going to trap him any more than he already is. My husband did not like that answer and said that there was no time limit on baby trapping, and that my intentions were clearly not pure given how I was acting as if his concerns were a joke. He said he had trusted me in the past, but me laughing in his face gave him no reason to trust me now. I did not really know what he wanted, or how I was meant to respond, and I said we should talk about this in the morning. Today I woke up and my husband was gone. But I did have a nasty text from his brother M28 saying that I had forced my husband into this pregnancy, despite it having been a joint decision. My husband is Mia and not responding to calls or texts, and now I am wondering how on earth to go forward. Any advice is appreciated. Comment 1. It sounds like your husband is dealing with some unresolved fears, possibly due to what happened with Geoff. Try to approach him calmly and express how hurtful his accusations are, but also be patient and understanding as he works through his feelings. Comment 2. This situation seems to stem from his insecurity and not your actions. It might help to seek couples counseling to work through these trust issues and better communicate with each other. Update. Not sure if I am allowed to post in here again, but I wanted to quickly update everyone who was kind enough to give me some advice. I didn't respond to anyone because my post was locked quite quickly, but I have read every single comment and message. I am very grateful. I realized while I was reading the comments that everyone was right. I wasn't angry enough. My husband had insulted me and our marriage in a very hurtful way, and it just didn't really register for a while. I was so confused and upset that it didn't occur to me to be angry, but I think everything just needed to sink in. In the meantime, I called my best friend F31, who has been such a rock in my life. She came over with some chocolate and was furious when she heard. She called her husband M34 to the house after I had gotten everything out of my system. He is a family lawyer, and he said that he would happily represent me if I wanted to go through with the divorce. This man is a saint, and will draw up divorce papers on Monday. My MIL F66 showed up with my husband in the car not long after my best friend's husband arrived, and she practically dragged him to the door. My MIL said that he had showed up at theirs late last night saying that he was certain that I was using the baby to trap him. Fortunately, my MIL is a smart woman, and absolutely tore him a new one before dragging him to the house today to apologies. My worm of a husband did not look me in the eye the entire time, but said that he was scared about becoming a dad and projected his fears onto me. He said he wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of commitment, but he will step up as if he is some kind of hero eye roll. I called him a coward, and told him that he should stay with his parents until I am ready to talk to him. I didn't want to say anything about the divorce papers because I didn't know what his reaction would be, but he will find out soon enough. I also showed my MIL the text from my bill, and her face was like a storm cloud. I don't know what will happen there, but I am sure it will be bad. For now, I am exhausted and just want to curl up and cry. My best friend has said she'll spend the night with me and we can watch silly movies. I have also made an appointment with a therapist for next week, but for now I just need to rest. I am exhausted and devastated that my marriage has come crumbling down. Sorry for the sad ending, everyone. New update. Thank you to everyone for all the messages and kind pieces of advice. I have received so many requests for an update, so I thought I would quickly post and let you all know how I am doing. Overall, everything has settled a little bit. In good news, I had a scan with the doctor my MIL attended with me, and the baby is happy and healthy. I finally found out the gender. I am having a little girl. I am over the moon. My MIL was a gem and was so touched that I had included her in the scan. She is very excited to be a granny. On that note, My mill organized a family lunch a couple of days after the scan. I was a little reluctant, but I knew that she had good intentions and wouldn't do anything to make matters worse. When I arrived, my husband and Bill were there, along with my Phil M70 and Mill. It was quite awkward until my Mill asked if anyone had anything to say. My Bill spoke first and apologized for his awful text, saying that he was swept up in the moment and wanted to support his brother. I explained how hurtful it had been to receive such a nasty and vindictive message, and that he knew as well as anyone that my husband and I had been trying for almost a year. He hung his head and mumbled something. That was pretty much the last I heard out of him for the afternoon. Next, my Mill looked quite pointedly at my husband, but he actively avoided anyone's eyes. Eventually she spoke up and announced that my husband would no longer be welcome to stay in their house. She said that she was ashamed to have her son behave the way that he has, and that she would prefer to make space for her granddaughter rather than have some lowlife hanging around. My husband had opened up his mouth to say something earlier, but his eyes lit up when she said granddaughter. My husband had always wanted a girl, and he was suddenly in tears, saying that he was so pleased to hear the gender. My husband was suddenly wanting to touch my belly and asked if he could come home and paint the nursery. I told him in no uncertain terms that he was not welcome, and that he had destroyed any trust I had in him. I told him that if I took him back, I would be worried that he would disappear at any kind of big news, and that I couldn't have someone at my side who balked at the first chance. He asked me if I was telling him it was over, and I point blank told him that I had engaged a lawyer. My husband was kind of frantic, but I felt so calm, like someone had put a blanket over me in the situation. Normally I am a big crier, but I felt so removed from everything. My husband said that this was not fair. He had shown a little bit of panic, and suddenly I am throwing away our life and denying him his daughter. My Phil reminded him that this is the same baby he felt trapped by no more than 2 weeks ago. My husband said it was a mistake and he was stressed, but my Mill asked him how he thought I felt. She asked him to imagine being so vulnerable and giving up your body to grow a family, and suddenly the one person you trust is accusing you of terrible things. He said it was a mistake and he projected his fears onto me. I told my husband that I felt so broken when he left, because I had all these dreams of a beautiful family which came crashing down in an instant. My husband said that he wanted those things with me, and he wanted our baby girl, but that he let the panic overwhelm him. I told him that wasn't a good enough excuse for what he put me through, and that he certainly didn't seem panicked when his mom had to drag him to my door to apologize. He didn't have much of an answer other than to say that he was ready now and wanted our girl. In all of this, in all the times he told me he wanted me and our baby, he never once apologized properly. After a very, very long discussion, the lunch wrapped up and my Mill stood by what she had said about my husband not being welcome. He asked again if he could come home with me, and I told him that it was my house. I owned the house before we married, and it was going to be a safe space for me. That is to say, he is not welcome. As far as I know, he is staying at some hotel. Finally, he was served divorce papers at work on Friday. My bestie's husband drafted them earlier, but I wanted to wait until I had thought it all through. I received a few missed calls and crying voicemails asking if I was really throwing away our family, but I did not respond. He even took a crying selfie sitting in his car, which my bestie laughed at quite a bit. My Mill called me when she heard, and told me that I am making the right decision. She said she never wanted my marriage to end this way or for her son to be so callous, but she said she is here for my baby and I, and that we will always be family. She even tried to apologize on my husband's behalf, but I told her that was not necessary. At the end of the day, his actions are his to own. My best friend has been around all weekend and we went baby clothes shopping for a little bit of sunshine in all of this. She has been such a rock, and her husband has helped so much with the process. I don't know what will happen next, but I feel much calmer and like I am making the right decision. Now, for the next story. Am I the idiot for wanting to take drastic action after my sister-in-law kicked out her teenage sons? Hey everyone, my husband 34 and I 36 are in a tough situation with my sister-in-law, Barbara 41, and we need an outside perspective on whether we're overreacting or if our stance is justified. We're leaning toward the latter but are open to thoughts. Thanks in advance. Barbara has 4 boys L17, O14, R13 and C7. Despite her having a rough history with bad relationships, her kids have always been well behaved. The only constant man in her life has been Reese 48, her on and off husband who does nothing for her or the kids except work. He blows his money gambling, cheats on her openly, and relies on her for everything else. For 7 years she's come to us venting about him, swearing it's the last time, but always goes back. In 2020, after yet another huge fight, the entire family intervened. We sat her down, told her we were here to help with anything she needed: lawyers, a safe place for her and the kids, even handling the legal stuff if necessary. She agreed to kick him out, but within 6 months he was back because he couldn't find a place to stay. This grown man, who has worked a steady job for 20 years, somehow needed help. Since then, things have gotten progressively worse. Barbara decided to stick with marriage counseling, even though the whole family urged her to leave. She's clung to the idea of honoring her marriage, despite the toxic environment. As a result, her kids have started to suffer. The eldest, Elle, started skipping school and smoking heavily. A few months ago, my husband got a 2 a.m. call from Elle, who said he was suicidal and afraid to act on it. When we got to their house, we learned he had told his stepdad the same thing, and Reese told him to just do it because no one would care. My husband, understandably, punched him in the face. We took Elle to the hospital and, after his release, brought him home with us for 3 weeks to help him recover. Eventually, Elle returned to his mom's house, thinking things had smoothed over, but they quickly fell apart again. Soon enough, the second oldest, O, began having issues too. For months they'd been fighting constantly, and we didn't realize how bad it had gotten until we couldn't get in touch with either of them. Barbara had gone silent. My husband showed up at her house unannounced, something our family often does for fun, only to find out that she had washed her hands of Elle and O for being disrespectful and kicked them out. She had even turned off their phones and didn't know where they were staying. We found out that they'd been crashing with friends for weeks, trying to stay under the radar because they were embarrassed. We picked them up from school and brought them home with us again. They told us that their mom and stepdad had been bullying them, constantly fighting, and that they didn't feel safe going back. Barbara admitted that she put them out but insisted things weren't as bad as they made it sound. Now my husband and I want to go full nuclear, report this to CPS, the police, and anyone who can intervene, but the rest of the family wants to handle it internally. We feel like 2 minors were abandoned, and that deserves an extreme response. But the family is now saying we're overreacting, and at the end of the day, these are not our children. So are we the assholes for wanting to report this situation and not leave it to family discussions? The 2 oldest boys are with us for now, but we're ready to escalate this. Comments. Comment 1. 100% abuse. And although the oldest 2 were the only ones kicked out, we all know that it was only because they pushed back. All 4 of those kids are suffering the same abuse. The oldest 2 are the only ones who have the ability to stand up against it. This has been going on for far too long while the family stood by and watched. They had a chance to handle this and yet did nothing. This isn't about appeasing the family. This is protecting those poor defenseless children and advocating for them all when they can't do it for themselves. Comment 2. Does anyone else think it's kind of demeaning to attribute Oop's response to pregnancy hormones? She clearly loves her nephews like they are her own. She's been ready to go scorched earth for a minute. Mama Bear has been out for a while, and has been looking for a good excuse. Update 1. It's been nearly 2 weeks since I made my original post, and it's been a wild ride. I have to be incredibly vague because of the newly opened case, but here's the most important thing: all of our nephews are safe with us. The boys have always had a place here and have visited often since they were tiny, long before any of this chaos started, so while the transition has been emotionally jarring for them, the move itself was thankfully smooth. Now, as for Barbara and Reese, they're facing charges regarding their treatment of the boys. It was worse than we originally thought. Barbara seems remorseful, but my husband is still livid. He believes she's only feeling sorry now that everything's out in the open and consequences are on the table. Whether her remorse is genuine or not, I'm just relieved we took action when we did, because it's terrifying to think how much worse things could have gotten if we hadn't. Family-wise, everything is a mess. The entire family is split over this, and it's not even worth the text to go over the thoughts of those who oppose us. Those who have sided with us, however, have been a tremendous help. Even though there are a lot of family issues and the logistics are complicated, fuck it, we made the right decision. What I can share in more detail is that soon after I posted, Reese showed up at our house, demanding that the boys return home with him. They refused. I told him to leave, but he escalated. Things got loud, aggressive, and started cursing at me and the boys. My husband wasn't home at the time. He was out picking up clothes and toiletries for Elle and O. I can only assume Reese felt emboldened by my husband's absence, because out of nowhere he sucker punched me right in the mouth. And read it. I'm not ashamed to admit I saw red. I swung back. It wasn't smart, but I did. He wasn't expecting that. I'm nice and really easygoing, but I guess I forgot that. I jumped on him, and let's just say he didn't expect a fight. I might not have landed the best hits, but he wasn't prepared for one at all. He scrambled out of there and sped off. I immediately called 911, while the boys called my husband, who thankfully was just around the corner. I'm fine, just ended up with a busted lip that looked worse than it was. Though my husband insisted I go to urgent care. The police met us there, and that's when we reported everything Reese's assault, and the whole situation with the boys. Reese and Barbara were picked up the next day. And in the middle of all this shit, I found out I'm pregnant. Yup. While I was at urgent care, they ran a routine test and boom, positive. I had no idea. No symptoms or anything, but it's still super early. All things aside, thank you for all of the comments, advice and ideas. Your support made a difference, and my nephews are safe.